So what's there to do in California these days during quarantine?
California is actually great for a quarantine life. There's great weather. So it's like 60, 70 degrees all the time. So there's no, no issue there to hang out in the parks. I did a trip up to some of the national parks last weekend. So pretty good out here.
Um, yeah, okay, all right, we can get started here. Hey guys, I want to welcome everyone to the PEAC Leadership and Service Series, panel number 7. We're delighted to have Mr. Pramod Thammaiah on today. Pramod is a successful entrepreneur who sold his last company, Onward, to Google. He currently works at Google leading new shopping ads initiatives, and he has graduated from Harvard in the top 2% of his class with a degree in applied mathematics. Great to have you on today, Pramod.
Thanks for having me.
So, I gave a little background about yourself, but can you just get us started off here? And, just share a little bit about your background and, what you currently do as of now.
Sure. I guess starting out, I'm not one of those people who had their life planned out from high school. I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to be doing with my career and like longer term. Went into college thinking I was going to do economics, slowly shifted that towards computer science. After college, I joined Google as a product manager and worked on a few different projects, including Chromebooks, which I hear a lot of people are using nowadays, at least in the classroom. From there, decided to start Onward. The first iteration of the company was actually called Agent Q, and I'll dive into this a little bit later. But that was a B2C service, and then we pivoted that into Onward, which became a B2B service. And then we sold to Google about 2 years ago. And now I've been at Google for the past couple of years.
Cool. So, you kind of talked a little bit about starting Onward, right? What really sparked you to kind of take the initiative and leave your comfy job at Google and go start this, really risky proposition?
A couple things. I think one, I want to push back on the notion that it's a super risky proposition. Basically, I mean, I'm pretty privileged and lucky in life. A few years of foregone salary wouldn't be debilitating, and I acknowledge that not everyone has that option. But for many people, professionally, particularly with like professional aspirations or working like tech jobs, that is an option. And the way I thought about it was, I was like 25 at the time. If I plan out the rest of my career, am I going to regret having started a company or not having started a company? And I thought, what's the worst thing that happens if I start a company? It's that it doesn't work. And, I go without a salary for a couple of years and, I'll have a nice learning experience to talk about, but, you kind of, like, really nothing terrible happens. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to get seriously injured or something like that, or it's really tragic. So I think viewing it from that lens, it reduced the downside risk a lot when I looked at it from that perspective. And the upside, so I think those are reasons for why I wasn't scared about doing it. The reasons why I did want to do it are more important. I think fundamentally for me, I'm definitely a person who likes wearing a lot of different hats. And this kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about not having a clear idea of what I want to do with my career. And being an entrepreneur is great for that. When we started, I had to be an engineer, I had to be a product manager, I had to be a salesman, the CFO, like basically every job is on you when there's only 2 or 3 guys in your company. And so that really appealed to me. Second, it was just more exciting, like sometimes with larger organizations, it can feel like your slice of what you're working on is very small, and you don't have really good influence or grasp of the bigger picture.
Uh-huh.
But I thought of it, I'd rather be captaining my own small little boat than being like a small piece of a larger puzzle. I think there are pros and cons for both, but I think at the time, for me personally, I was excited about trying something new and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, given the fact, I think I read somewhere that, I don't know if the stat's true or not, but it was saying something in the field of, only 18% of entrepreneurs, end up being successful with their business. And so, looking at it from that sense, Onward is, quite successful, just being acquired by, a large tech company. So, what are some things that made Onward unique? And, at the end of the day, what made it successful, looking at it from that lens?
I mean, a big dose of luck. I think, with that statistic, 18%, you want to believe that it's all in our control. The reality is there's a lot of things that happen outside of our control. So I think we've got to make sure we acknowledge that. I think there are some other key pieces though for us. Timing was very good. So give a bit more background about what Onward did. Onward was in the chatbot space. So we basically developed some natural language processing technology that helped our clients automate their conversations with customers. And so when we founded the company, we were actually about a year or two earlier than the big chatbot hype cycle that happened around 2016. And so we had already developed the technology by that point. So we timed the market really well, in some ways inadvertently. And then as a result, because of the kind of the buzz around that space in AI, NLP specifically, the acquisition talks that we had with several companies and stuff actually went relatively straightforwardly as a result of that, because it was a very in-demand technology. Mm-hmm. So I think timing is a big part of it. The other piece I'd say is also team. I was very fortunate to work with two of my closest friends on the company, and that helped a lot. All of us looked forward to showing up to work every day when times got tough, and inevitably they were many times, and there were some very dark times where we're thinking about closing up shop. It helped that you enjoyed spending time with these people because you're spending a lot of time with them. We complement each other in good ways. There was a lot of trust to bounce ideas off of each other, disagree, and things like that. So I think luck, timing, and teamwork.
Yeah, I mean, and also, to push a little deeper on one of these questions, a lot of people have this notion like, I got to find someone else to start my company. I need to find someone that's really good in this field. What really prompted you in that sense to kind of necessarily say, hey, I'm going to start this with my friends and, it's going to be successful in that sense? What prompted you to really do that?
So basically my co-founder and I, we've known each other since fourth grade. We've been, close friends throughout. And we'd always, even in high school and college, had been exchanging startup ideas, and we were both very interested in the space. And he's actually the one that reached out to me. We had both left our first jobs out of college, and he was like, "Hey, I want to start a company, and we've always talked about this. Why don't we start a company together?" So yeah, it kind of worked out really well for us in that regard. It was somebody I'm very close with, I trust a lot. And timing worked out for both of our life circumstances that we were in a place in our mid-20s that this was the right thing to do for us at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I can definitely relate to as well. Having a great team here at PEAC and just being able to kind of work with them has really made it, the organization grow in a lot of ways that I would never seen, in the starting days. So thanks for your answer there, Pramod. And now, that you've kind of climbed the mountain and, had a successful exit, what are some things you wish you knew before you started Onward, right? Like if a student came up to you and say, hey, what were some things that you wish that you can give me advice on before I go to my startup? What are some things you wish you knew?
I think there are a lot of lessons I took on, but we don't have that much time to cover that. But I think two main takeaways I would have. One is basically there's a difference between a good product and a good business. And that's something that's not easy to learn before you start your own company. Because often when you're working at a larger firm or a larger organization, you're responsible for a small part. And I used to be a product manager before I started Onward. And so all my focus was around building the best product. I didn't really think too much about kind of the bigger picture, how does this fit into the marketplace and stuff like that. I owned a small piece of a larger product. And so you can often make a really phenomenal product technology-wise, that no one uses and no one's willing to pay for. But the flip side is also true. You can make a terrible product. There are tons of multi-billion-dollar companies out there with god-awful products, but people pay for them and they're phenomenal businesses. So I think it's very easy it's simple to think, hey, if I just make something really awesome, people will come. The reality is go-to-market is a huge, huge, huge part of building a successful company. And that's part of the part that I had to struggle the most with and learn the most about was how do we built this awesome thing. How do we get the word out? How do we convince people that it's worth, departing from an existing solution to our product? So sales, marketing, those kind of things are really hard, and like not to trivialize the impact they have on the trajectory of a company.
Mm.
So product does not equal business is like the one line summary of that. The other big one is basically me and my co-founder had this phrase called default to action. Mm-hmm. And basically whenever we got into a habit of, overanalyzing or trying to figure out the perfect solution, one of us would call this out and say, hey, we're just wasting time. We have an answer that's about 80% right. Let's just get going and start doing things. And we'll figure it out as we go. Versus, spending forever to get like the 99% confidence that you have the right answer. Because the reality is there's so much uncertainty and so much unknowns out there. It's really false certainty when you think you've analyzed every decision to get the right answer. And then the other bit is, particularly as a younger company, your advantage compared to a lot of your competitors is that you can move quickly. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot better to say, like, if you think about iteration time, it's a lot better to be able to push out a new feature every week. And then, after 4 weeks, you've had 4 features out and only one of them worked. Great. Sunset the 3 and keep the one that worked, right? In a month, you've done that. Versus analyzing those 4 features to death. And then after 3 months, okay, this one feature is the one that's going to work. And then launching that, right? You can see by moving quickly and being willing to fail and do the wrong things, and like capping your losses, you can actually move faster than if you make sure you have the right answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think flexibility and adaptability, I think, are 2 of the most important things that, we've seen here at PEAC for sure. And, kind of to backtrack off of one of the questions there, I think the first part you said was talking about, selling the product and product market fit, kind of that area. What are some things, as most of the students or most of the people in the audience are kind of either high school or college students, what can they start to do from today to really sharpen that skill of, selling or doing things like that? What would your advice be to those young people?
I think it's just the kind of general, I don't want to trivialize it, but I think the things you can do in high school or to prepare yourself for a career in there is developing a really strong sense of empathy and, developing your social skills. Like empathy, because you need to understand why your customer may want to buy your product, as well as understanding where they're coming from. What are their pressures and concerns and, risks that they're willing to tolerate versus not? What are they trying to get out of their job or their company's goals and so on? So having a really good ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes is incredibly important. The other bit is, you're talking a lot to strangers. You got to build rapport, build a connection quickly. So getting very comfortable public speaking, getting comfortable talking to strangers. And these are things you can kind of just do passively, not quite passively, but I think the word I'm looking for is, I was part of the debate team. I gave a lot of that helped me develop my public speaking skills tremendously. I was very involved extracurricularly in college, and that helped me meet a lot of strangers. So I think it's important to realize that, even as a student, your grades aren't the only things that you're trying to learn, right? Like the stuff in the classroom is definitely incredibly important and something you should focus on. But you also want to make sure you're developing a lot of other skills outside the classroom. And I think, in our modern business environment, socializing, networking, building those kind of social connections is incredibly important.
Yeah, no, I think those are some great things that our students can definitely start to, work on for today. So with that, I'll kind of hand it off to Vaishnav here to continue this panel here.
Hey, Pramod, thanks for joining us. So, you talked a little bit about your experience with Onward and kind of the specific experiences you've had, but kind of moving to industry now. You've worked at both ends of the spectrum, at a small company startup, and also at a large behemoth like Google. So, we're just curious, as a tech company, how do you remain to stay relevant and ahead of your competitors?
I think there have been several books published on this subject, and there's no consensus because you know some companies succeed in doing this. Like Netflix is a great example of a company that's reinvented itself several times and kept ahead of the competition. But there are plenty of examples of successful companies that haven't done that and have gone by the wayside. Frankly, I don't think there's a simple answer to this. I think one high-level idea to have is to not worry about where your existing market is and existing cash flows are. So there's a great book, Innovators of the Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, that kind of tackles this problem about how do companies stay relevant and move with the times. And one of the big takeaways is basically companies that look at their existing cash flows and say, hey, we can't create a competing product because today we will cannibalize our own sales, will eventually just get it cannibalized by a competitor. So the classic example is Blockbuster and Netflix, right? Blockbuster held on to like their DVD sale, physical DVD rental business, and didn't really get into streaming, even though that's where kind of the puck was going. If you're going to take a Wayne Gretzky quote there, and yeah, at the time, Blockbuster's executives decided not to make a streaming service because they didn't want to cannibalize their really great cash cow. But what ended up happening is that 5 years later, a competitor just cannibalized it for them. So if you don't cannibalize your own businesses, somebody else will. So I think it's very important to realize that the market's not static. The market is dynamic and they're competitive forces. And so you have to be willing to, I think the best way of putting it, not cut your losses, but be willing to realize that what you have is for today's present situation. And 5 years from now or tomorrow, like the world's gonna be very different. So make sure you're always thinking about how's the market gonna change and adapt to the future coming market rather than having a sunk cost fallacy around what you already have.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And kind of just going deeper on that question, it seemed like a lot of your answer was focused on, kind of pivoting and adapting. So, earlier you mentioned that, working as a startup, it's kind of easy to move fast, but, when you're working at a company like Google, how difficult is it to change direction and pivot when you're trying to stay ahead of these trends?
It is there. I'd say by and large, it's harder at a larger company, just because it's a lot easier to change the minds of 2 people or 3 people, right? To get on track with a new thing, than it is like I don't know what the exact number is now, but 100,000 person company or more, and there's a lot of coordination problems there, or challenges rather than problems. But I think there are also other advantages where larger companies have a lot more resources, have a lot more technological know-how. So I think that there are pros and cons, but I think fundamentally what's different is at a startup, you're fundamentally on track to go out of money, go out of business, right? Like the default state is if something doesn't change in a year, you're out of money and you're bankrupt. And so there's a lot of incentive to change the status quo, because if you tread water, there's this concept called default alive, default dead. So you're default dead if you don't change anything. So it's a lot easier to convince yourself, hey, we need to change our strategy when it doesn't matter, and you have nothing to lose. But I think when you have very successful businesses that are already working really well, it's not I just kind of criticized Blockbuster's executives a few minutes ago, but retrospect is 2020. Like at the time, who knew if like streaming was the future or not, right? Maybe. And so it actually is a lot harder of a decision to decide, hey, we have this really successful business line, let's like abandon it or pivot strongly away from it. So I think that's like one of the bigger challenges is like there isn't a lot of clarity or certainty necessarily when you're making these big decisions. And it's easier to change direction when you're not really leaving anything behind. It's a lot harder when you're leaving something pretty successful and trying to do a different strategy.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing your opinions on that and kind of answering that tangent. So kind of shifting focus here to our current situation for all of us that in some ways has united the world that we lived in or that we live in. In what ways has a pandemic changed? I guess things for you personally, but in a broader sense, kind of the playing field for big tech moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are kind of related for me personally. I think, I mean, we're all on Zoom right now. I think one of the big changes is remote work, spending a lot of hours indoors by myself. You know, obviously there's a whole personal life aspect of it. Like socializing is a challenge now. There's only a few things you can do that are safe. But I think professionally, I think the big challenge is we went from a environment where we're in the office a lot of hallway conversations, get things done, and now things have to be scheduled on video calls, a lot more emails, things like that. So I think that's been a big shift. And I think broadly for the industry, you're already seeing this with, a lot of the companies have said we're going to be working from home for at least another 6 months or longer. Many companies have just said we're going fully remote indefinitely. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes in a lot of like white collar services oriented jobs, like engineers or something like that, where you can kind of do your job remotely. And so that democratizes geography a lot. In the past, like the Bay Area, Silicon Valley has been a real kind of had a lot of gravitational pull where people who wanted to succeed in tech felt the need to come out to the Bay Area to be close to investors, to be close to other people with the necessary talent and know-how and the human capital that is present here. But that also led to, incredible cost of living here. It can be kind of crowded and congested. And so I think there are a lot of people reckoning with what does that mean for them personally, where, hey, if I don't have to stay here for my job, well, where do I want to live? And I think we're going to see basically, I don't think office work is going to go away 100%. I think, once it's safe to do so, I assume a lot of companies will be back in the office. I frankly think people are just more productive in the office, but I do think there's going to be more friendliness towards remote work than in the past we had. Just because we've done it for so long now, and I think we're starting to work out the kinks. And there are pretty big advantages for being able to support a remote workforce. Primarily, you can hire from various geographies and get access to a wider talent pool. And this is particularly important for less well-capitalized companies who can't afford to pay, say, really expensive Bay Area salaries. They want to hire good talent. They can pay less and they'll hire somebody from, the Midwest or something like that, and get a similar amount of work output for them.
Right. Yeah. No. Thanks for sharing that, Pramod. And you kind of touched on this in some ways, but I was just wondering if if you're still involved in some sense in the startup community, how has the pandemic affected startups that are kind of new and budding? Has it served as an advantage for them, disadvantage, and just want to hear your opinions on that.
Yeah, I mean, I kept a little involved with the startup thing, but it's different than when you're in it. I feel like you have to live and breathe it. Versus now, I'm sort of like an observer to some extent. I meet with a lot of founders and investors and chat, but it's still pretty informal. My sense is it's added a lot of uncertainty, and I think it's just unclear how this is going to play out. It's still too soon, and I think it's easy to forget that it's only been, March was 5 months ago. It hasn't even been half a year of us living this life. A lot of business cycles take a lot longer than that to play out. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, we're not really sure how the broader economy is going to recover, or if the recession is going to deepen. I think that's going to have a lot of impact on bottom lines of startups. It's also very industry specific. I don't think you can make a general claim about what's going to happen. Like, for example, Airbnb and Uber have been hit particularly hard by the pandemic, just given their businesses are incredibly reliant on activities that people are doing a lot less of now. It's a lot scarier to go travel or take a cab and things like that. Versus there are other companies, that are, say, pure software play, like Instacart. They're doing great because people are ordering groceries, a lot. So I don't think you can kind of do a one-size-fits-all answer to this. It does add a lot of uncertainty, and I think I've heard anecdotally that has led to investors being a little more cautious about deploying capital, just because, one, they can't really meet with founders or new founders to get that trust before they give them their check, and also the uncertainty also makes it hard to project growth rates and things like that for what kind of valuations we give. So in general, uncertainty leads to like slowness it leads to people taking longer to make decisions, stuff like that. So I think that's how it's played out. But it's still honestly too soon to tell. It could be a year from now, there's a vaccine that comes out tomorrow and we're all great and it was just a blip, or who knows, a vaccine never gets invented and this is our new normal. And I think that's going to have much bigger repercussions.
Right. And we talked a little bit about the current state of the world, but kind of looking forward now to the next decade and kind of forecasting, what do you think is in store for the tech industry in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think there's a lot in store, and I'll be the first to admit anybody who's made projections 10 years away are usually wrong. So with that caveat, something I think about is I think there's the slowing down of Moore's law is somebody. So for those of you who are not familiar with Moore's law, it's basically this idea that every 18 months, the density of transistors and microchips doubles. And what that's led to is effectively an exponential increase in CPU performance. And we've basically had Moore's law for like 30 plus years at this point. And it's not a fundamental law of nature or anything that there's no reason for this to happen, but it's basically becoming industry standard. But we've been hearing from a lot of microchip manufacturers that it's going to slow down. We're basically running into like physical limits. Like we can't, physically get the atoms closer together. And there's really not much you can do about that. So I think that's going to be an interesting change for the industry, where we can't just rely on hardware improvements to drive performance improvements and product improvements. I'm not really sure how that's going to necessarily play out. I mean, maybe we're going to have to get accustomed to a different pace of innovation. Maybe the innovation is going to come from different areas, but I think that's going to definitely be a big impact on the future of computing for the next 10 years. I think another interesting trend that we're going to see, the advent of like 5G, cellular data, we're also getting kind of the point where I think the marginal utility of additional bandwidth is decreasing. And so before, you go from dial-up modem to cable, there's a big change in what you can do. You can do video conferencing now rather than just email. But once you start getting to gigabit speeds and beyond, there aren't too many activities. Like, yes, you can do video conferencing 4K now. That's better. But I'm curious to see, I haven't seen the killer use cases yet of what that unlocks. Maybe it's going to be really high, 4K VR video conferencing, and that really enables remote working in a much bigger way than it does currently. Potentially, it finally enables autonomous driving because, you can have 5G connections to the car and have remote people drive in the corner case situations. So I think those are the two big hardware trends. I'm really curious to see how it will play out. I think undoubtedly they're going to have big impacts. The other big is more cultural and societal. We've been seeing, tech, say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, was its own industry. Software hadn't quite touched everything. But we're increasingly seeing that the tech is not really an industry anymore. Tech is really, we're talking about, when we say tech, we're talking about like software. And software is in every industry now. Like basically every retailer has an online presence. Everyone knows they had to be in this game. And so I think how that plays out is going to be very interesting. I think it's just going to be more ubiquitous than what we think about. And we're also seeing potentially some of the downsides of tech. There's a lot of the congressional hearings about stuff like that. So I think tech has gone from a little bit of a sideshow to being the main act in our economy and our cultural zeitgeist. And I think that's going to have a big impact as well in terms of how we start thinking about it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's very interesting how you see tech as more of a tool than just, a sole industry. And, kind of moving forward from here, what is your advice to, students that are interested in kind of using this tool of technology and, people that, want to enter the world of startups and entrepreneurship?
Sorry, can you restate the question?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm just curious, and all of us here at PEAC are wondering, someone who's already done it once, what is your advice to students that are interested in using technology as a tool and who want to enter the world of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think the best way to think about technology in my mind is it's a way to highly leverage labor. Basically, you used to take a lot of people to build a website. Now you can probably put it together in an afternoon using some of the tools that are available. Particularly with like the public cloud, like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud and some other players, it's a lot easier to scale a business, right? In the 90s, just like setting up your own server farm was like a big part of being a tech company. And so I think the way to think about technology is there's a lot of great open source packages and tools, existing software that you can use, existing like platforms to host your services, that it becomes a lot easier to build a big business with a lot fewer people. And on top of that, to get really broad reach, right? Like there are a ton of small, tiny businesses in the developing world that basically exist solely on like Amazon sales, right? Like they have like a storefront and they sell through that, or they use Shopify or something like that. And they're shipping internationally. Like the amount of infrastructure we have now for like global trade is just unprecedented. So I think it allows you to build products and niches that weren't feasible before, right? Because the two effects happening. One, as I described, the cost of building a business has gone down a lot, and you can do a lot more with a lot fewer people. The other thing is your ability to reach a potential market has gone up a lot. So it used to be like you open a store, you can only sell to people in like a 10-mile radius, right? And so you had to basically sell to the average consumer in that 10-mile radius, and that meant that you couldn't be too niche in the types of products you offered. But now you can basically get access to billions of people around the world.
Right.
Maybe it's like there's a very small collectors community on a very niche product, and there are only 1 million people in the world. Less than 1 in 1,000 people want this thing. But 1 million people is a huge market, depending on how much, how expensive your product is. And so you can build a very viable business on very small niches. And you see this a lot, right? Like a lot of products and companies are focused on that, like focus on very small sub-demographics. And I think that's something to think about, is like, you don't have to build a business that necessarily appeals to a large number of people. It doesn't even have to appeal to 10% of the population. It can appeal to 1% of the population and still be a very viable company.
Right. Thanks so much, Pramod, for, giving that advice to our students. And I think the best way to wrap it up is kind of hand it to the students now. So we're going to head over into Q&A. If anyone wants to come off and unmute themselves to ask a question, feel free. Also, if you want to type it in the chat, one of us can read it out loud. All right, I guess, while we're waiting for a question, Pramod, you talked a little bit about globalization kind of in your last answer. So, working at Google, that's kind of a multinational corporation, how have you seen, technology develop and grow in countries around the world?
I don't know if I can speak too much from necessarily my experience at Google, but speaking from like my general experience as a person in the world right now, I think the big changes is just the rate of deployment is mind-boggling, right? I remember visiting family in India in the early 2000s, like 2003, and getting dial-up internet itself was a challenge, right? Like it was hard to do that. And I remember talking on AOL Instant Messenger with a friend at the time and being really excited that I got internet. And there, you definitely felt this massive digital divide between the developed world and the developing world. But now you go to India today, like there's LTE speeds on like the latest smartphones, and in some cases the speeds are faster. I don't think the gap quite exists. I mean, there are obviously a lot of other developmental markers that exist, but at least on the technology side, it has been a great flattening effect where the rate of improvement for the top of the line is not quite as fast as the rate of deployment for the midline. And so what you're seeing is like the technologies that we had, say, at the cutting edge here in the US, like 5 years ago, has already caught up and been deployed. And maybe they're behind by a couple of years on average, but you can get access to the cutting edge basically anywhere in the world at this point. And I think that's like really crazy. That wasn't the case for most of human history.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing, Pramod. It looks like Shashrik here asked a question. He says, building products, like you said, has become easier because of the widespread availability of tools, whether it be cloud or APIs. What skill do you see lacking within industry that students can improve on, whether it be technical or more soft skill oriented?
Um, I don't know if I would say it's lacking in the industry. I mean, I think there are a lot of different types of people who work in technology and come with their own strengths. But I do think in terms of a person, like I think I'll reframe this question to be more about personal advice around what skills to think about if you want to enter the space. I think communication is like, so if you're somebody who's pretty technical, a gap I often see is really good communication skills. It's one thing to know how to code and to think about computer science problems or engineering challenges, but you're not going to only be working with other engineers. And even if you are working with only other engineers, you need to convey your ideas to them. And so I've seen many times like really strong technical people who have very, underdeveloped communication skills, and that holds them back in their career development. There's only so much responsibility you can take on as an individual contributor, right? To kind of really leverage yourself, you got to be able to lead teams and, cross-pollinate ideas with other folks, communicate your ideas to people outside of the engineering teams, like, on the business side and so on. And so developing your communication skills is really important. And like kind of what I mentioned earlier, get out there, socialize, don't, make sure your grades don't slip, but also realize that as you're going through school, it's a great opportunity to develop these skills, get involved in extracurriculars, talk to many strangers, network, kind of be fearless in that regard. So I think that's one major thing. I think on the flip side of it, I think there are a lot of folks, as I mentioned, tech used to be more of a niche industry, and now it's becoming more of like every company has tech in it. And you're seeing the general population in general moving towards tech. A lot of people who 10, 15 years ago wouldn't have worked in tech do now because they're just, frankly, it's just a much bigger industry. And I think there's a pretty low level of technical literacy. I think there are many folks who want to work in tech and don't know how to code. And I think the reality is the bar to learning how to code is really low now. There's so many free resources online. Like you can learn how to code in a week. And I'm not saying like good enough to be an engineer or anything like that, but like to get some baseline level of understanding what it is that goes into building the products you're trying to, market or sell, and getting a more empathetic understanding of like the development process is very easy. So I think at a high level, I would say that there are a lot of really easy to access resources available now for free. Like, when I started Onward, I had a math and statistics background from my time in college, but I didn't really have a strong machine learning or AI background. But I just took a number of classes online for free. I didn't pay a dime at the time for free. I took a lot of classes. And one was from like a Stanford professor who focuses on machine learning, so like best in the world kind of education, and got up to speed and reading a lot of blogs and articles. So I think realizing that it doesn't have to be a huge ask to expand your knowledge base and your skill set. There's a lot of really simple, easy things you can do to kind of shore up your weaknesses and build on your strengths.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pramod. We have a question here from Jacob. He says, what is one of your biggest difficulties of opening up a startup? And how did you find an idea you thought would hit it off?
So I'll kind of answer both those questions with the same one. The biggest difficulty is finding product market fit. And so I think I mentioned earlier, we had started a company called Agent Q. And Agent Q was a direct-to-consumer type service where it was a chatbot that you talk with to help you get like shopping recommendations. So, hey, I'm on the market for a TV. Agent Q, what's the best TV I should buy? And Agent could be like, oh, well, look, tell me how big your living room is. What's your rough budget? Okay, based on that, this is what I recommend. Like, these are the 2 TVs I recommend. What we found was our clients loved the service. Like people really, really loved it. The challenge was it was really hard to make money off of them because we would send them links to buy the TV, but then they would just take the recommendation and buy it up themselves, on their own computers, and we wouldn't see that traffic. And so it was really hard to monetize. And so we had a great product, but a terrible business. And so, that was the idea we thought was a slam dunk when we started. And I think we worked on it for like a year, and it was pretty clear that it wasn't a good business. And so to kind of answer the second part of your question, it's not obvious when you have a good idea or not, honestly. There's a reason why most startups fail, and even most startups that get funded fail. So it's not even like, oh, the founders deluded themselves into thinking this is a good idea. They somehow were able to convince external investors to put good money in backing them. And even the best, if you look at the portfolios of the best VCs, like most of the portfolio companies also fail. So the reality is it's really, really, really hard to know before you start a company if an idea is going to work or not. Because the reality is, if it was obvious and if it was clear that it was going to succeed, it would have already been done. So I think the bar you should have if you want to start a company is not, oh, this will succeed for sure. It's, maybe this has a chance of working. Maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe there's I have an insight here that the rest of the world or market isn't seeing. Don't have the bar at it's a slam dunk, because you're just not going to find an idea that's going to do that. So yeah, and then the hardest part was definitely finding product market fit, and that's where most startups fail, right? Like finding a product that they can sell to the market and find clients who are willing to give them money is really, really challenging. I mean, I'm sure all of you guys know how, kind of let's call it frugal you are around buying software products in particular. Like, I'll spend $5 on a sandwich, but $1 for an app, and I'm like thinking, twice about it. So it can be a very challenging place to get people to give up their money, particularly when there are a lot of really good free tools available.
Right. Yeah. And, thanks for sharing that, that short story about Agent Q. That's very interesting. So going on to Mary's question here, she asks, what is your opinion on the increased reliance on AI and automation in tech?
Ooh, this is a really broad question. I think it depends on the particular applications. In general, I think it's like net good. Way I think about it is traditional software programming allowed us to automate a lot of tasks that we could explicitly articulate, right? If I tell you how to do long division, I can actually tell you the rules and the algorithm for doing long division. So as a result, it's pretty easy to translate that into standard software code. But then there's a whole other class of problems that we as humans know how to do, but have a really hard time articulating. So for example, computer image recognition is like one of the holy grails of AI and machine learning, or, in my case, natural language processing. Like, we're having this conversation right now, and you understand what I'm saying, I understand what you're saying. There's tone, there's sarcasm, there are jokes, there's references to concepts outside of what we're talking about, cultural references, things like that. And somehow we're all conversing, and it's working, right? But if I ask you to actually write down the set of rules or the thought process you have right now to explain how you were able to keep up with this conversation, you wouldn't be able to do it. And linguists have struggled for decades to come up with a set of rules for how language works. And they've gotten, maybe 70% of the way. I'm pulling a number out of my head, but they're gotten somewhere there. But clearly, as we've all experienced with machine translation, it's not as good as a human. And I think what machine learning, and particularly neural nets, has really unlocked is our ability to solve problems of this class. Basically, where we're able to do it, but we don't know what the rules are. It's just kind of an intuitive, kind of almost a subconscious layer. So I think a lot of the online translation services now leverage machine learning in a big way, and frankly, they've improved a lot than the historically rules-based translation services. So I think there's a lot of potential here to basically solving a whole class of problems that weren't unsolvable before. I think there are concerns around hidden bias, and it's easy to do machine learning wrong. So I'll touch on two concepts. So hidden bias is basically, it's very easy to have a machine learning algorithms inadvertently, not even like anybody maliciously doing this, but inadvertently coding race or gender or, things like that are protected classes, and we don't want as a society to be used for, say, decision making on, say, like, say you're a bank and you want to figure out how credit worthy someone is, and whether or not to give them a mortgage or what interest rate to give. You could explicitly take out the variables or the features that learn on race or things like that. But there are very subtle ways in which that can still enter the model, and it's hard to keep that out. And so I think we got to be really cautious as a society that we don't really kind of completely take our hands off of these models and just say, hey, the machine spit it out and let's deal with it, because it can be doing things that we don't exactly want it to be doing. The other concern would also be, and this is something that most data scientists is aware of, but say there's a disease that only 1% of the population has, and you develop a test that just says no all the time, right? That test will be right 99% of the time, but it's wrong for the critical 1%, right? It's highly accurate, but you and I know it's a useless test. So being cautious about machine learning algorithms that fall into that trap, and most people who develop these type of algorithms are aware of this problem, but it can be very subtle and overlooked when we're developing things. So making sure that it's basically called like training bias, where you have too many training examples from one particular population and not enough from an underrepresented population, and as a result, the overrepresented set of your training population can affect the predictions for the other ones and basically disadvantage minority populations.
Right. Yeah, these sound like some very valuable considerations to kind of make when you're working with these models in AI. So thank you, Mary, for asking that. Great question. If anyone wants to ask, one last question, we have Pramod there for a few more minutes.
Well, I actually have a question, Pramod. So, as someone coming from the tech sector, do you think, I mean, I know you're not like a financial analyst or financial planner in any way, but, what do you think of Bitcoin, and do you think there's a future for cryptocurrency? It's just something that, I've been interested in for the last couple of years. I think, the problem behind Bitcoin and the way they solved it was very clever. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Unfortunately, I don't really have a strong opinion. Crypto is not an area that I've looked too much into. I'm aware of it. I have a rough understanding of how the system works. I think there are a lot of challenges. I think they're particularly, as a medium of transaction, Bitcoin, I think transactions take several minutes at this point or longer, and that's problematic. And I think there's been a lot of speculative runs, like there's been a lot of variance in the value of Bitcoin. So for something that has to act as a store of value, it kind of not great for that. But clearly a lot of smart people believe cryptocurrency and the promise it has. So I'm not going to say it doesn't have that future. Personally, it's not something I've thought too much about or looked into too much.
What about the aspect of blockchain? Do you think there's a lot of application processes in tech? I mean, I think there's been a lot of hype around it, rightfully so, but I don't think there's really been that many breakouts on the stage related to blockchain technology, especially in the consumer space and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental advantage of blockchain is you don't have to rely on a central authority of trust, right? The trust is, as long as the majority of the network is willing to agree to something, then it's true. But central authorities are incredibly efficient, right? Having a central bank or somebody like, say I'm trying to send you money via transaction and we both use a particular bank, having that bank be able to say, yes, you have the money in the account and I put the money in your account, just makes things a lot easier, right? It's faster, it's simpler, and so on. Computationally, it's easier. So I think there's there are plenty of disadvantages to not using a central authority. So you basically need to find a context in which you don't have a central authority that third parties can trust. And I think there are cases of that. Like one use case that I find kind of interesting is in a lot of countries without strong municipal records or like government records of land ownership, the blockchain might be a really great way of doing that, where you don't have to rely on potentially corrupt governments to enforce land ownership rights. But even there, like you kind of need some sort of official sanction that this is the way that the government's going to recognize land ownership. And I personally haven't heard of any breakthroughs there. So I think there's a lot of potential. But we've had blockchain technology for a while now, and I haven't really seen many killer use cases. But clearly, a lot of money is going into the space. Bitcoin's valued a lot, Ethereum, and all these things. So I think there are use cases, but I'm personally not too aware of them.
Yep. I mean, I just wanted to hear your opinion. I think it's kind of interesting, but thank you again for Pramod for joining us here today. I know everyone here at PEAC appreciates it. For those that could not make this, this will be recorded and on our website for you all to view. So again, we just want to thank Pramod for, spending his time with us and giving us his thoughts. Thank you again, Pramod.
Thanks for having me.
See you guys. Bye.